Okay, so let's take a look at the internet weather for the last week or so here, and we're going to start out with a little bit of a mystery. We've been seeing activity growing on port 4159 UDP. I don't think the activity is actually associated with where this port's registered for. What we're seeing is scan sources growing on this port. You know, John Hogaboom had been doing some analysis on this topic, and you know, as you can see from the graph, it's been growing. We see 30 days of activity ever since about the middle of December. Activity growing on this particular port. It appears to be associated with, you know, devices connected to the internet that are exhibiting basically the source of the scanning activity. So I guess the theory is that these devices are being compromised, included in a botnet, and used as a part of a recruiting activity to other things. What we don't really know is what really they're targeting. So if you have any insights into that, we're certainly welcome your feedback. John had done some analysis into the payloads associated with this, being able to capture the payloads of the scanning activity. And he sees 16 bytes of payload in 60 byte packets. There's some very subtle variations in the payload, although generally it's pretty fixed. And it's scanning basically sequentially, sometimes backwards, sometimes forward, but effectively not a random scanning across the network. So there are some specific biases associated with that scanning activity. As I noted a little bit earlier, pretty consistently the devices that this is originating from are, you know, devices that are connected to the network, be security cameras or perhaps home routers that are associated with this. You know, John made a note here as well that a fair portion are listing on port 7547 TCP. You know, that's been associated with that misfortune cookie that's been discussed in the public domain recently.
Chris, we've recently done some investigation around this area, haven't we? You want to talk about that?
Part of
the Internet of Things.
Yeah, part of the inception attack was using compromised routers, and so Waylon, the researcher on our team who was doing that, got interested in this, and over the Christmas break, he set up a honeypot using an ARM processor and a little embedded Linux kernel that he left vulnerable, default password, you know, admin, whatever, on purpose. And he said within minutes, a crawler had found it and had loaded a script on it. And the first one was the Lizard Squad guys that were using these for DDoS. And so he says their script was pretty dumb. It would just go out and download one payload after another and try to load it until they found one that actually worked. Kind of brute force match the payload to the platform. He said the other two that came along were more sophisticated. But both of those were doing the same thing. They were matching a payload to his specific version of Linux and processor type. And the big takeaway for me in reading his post was he noted that out of dozens of different packages that they had for different processors and platforms, except for the Intel 8086 compatible ones, there was no detection in the AV community. VirusTotal had no hits on any of these because we've got a mature ecosystem for antivirus on the Wintel platform. That doesn't exist anywhere else. There aren't any AV companies making software for home routers and cameras and DVD players, and those are the things that are getting infected. And what do you do? I mean, are people going to update the firmware on those? Are we going to get patches for it? It's like the Wild West out there.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I think, you know, we had a discussion a little bit earlier about the notion of perhaps as some sort of a safety rating for internet-connected devices. And I think we're really going to have to try to move in that direction for the safety of the folks that are, you know, buying these devices. That is their privacy safety, the safety of their data, the safety of their systems that are sitting behind it, but also safety for others that are on the internet or subject. You mentioned the Lizard Squad. They're targeting these devices so that they can create a botnet for doing denial of service attacks, and we certainly see a lot of that activity. And we'll see a little bit later how aggressive some of this activity has become and prolific. So it's getting to be, I think, more serious of an issue.
Much more.
And you know, just to expound upon this, this next item here is scan sources and probes on port 32764. This is a backdoor port that was apparently put in deliberately on some device. Now, I don't think it's necessarily the manufacturers themselves that deliberately put these in here, but something has put this backdoor in these devices. Again, it's like Cisco, Linksys, Netgear, Diamond. They've got home router devices that have this backdoor in it. There's a patch for it. but apparently the patch doesn't actually get rid of the backdoor, it just kind of hides the backdoor. So you have to know the right packet to send and then it wakes it up. That's not such a good thing. And so you can judge for yourself. There's a research paper that was put out there, a presentation that was put out on the internet. We've provided the link here for you. But what we're seeing is more and more sources doing scanning activity. Now this is a little bit on and off, but we see sources doing scanning activity for this port, presumably to go out and exploit those devices or perform some other set of nefarious activity. Taking a look at the top 10 most probed ports, no real surprises here. We've talked about many of these previously. We'll walk through them briefly. Port 135 TCP, we've been seeing this probing activity for some time now. Again, another sort of mysterious one. Port 135 isn't really readily used as it was in the past, but there seems to be a particular actor group that's out there that's trying to find something on port 135. Followed by port 23 TCP. We're going to take a little closer look at that as we go forward. Followed by port 9064. Now, remind me, this was a proxy port, is that right? Port 9064? And we got an answer from the audience, and the answer is a yes.
He wins a free t-shirt.
We love our audience.
Yeah, actually, we have an audience here today, which is a rather rare but pleasant event. In any case, port 9064, that's hunting for proxies, followed by port 22 TCP, that's SSH, which is looking for, again, similar to port 23, looking for devices that can get a command line access. Followed by port 8080 TCP, that's generally looking for proxies as well, oftentimes to anonymize the malicious activity. Followed by port 445, configure is going down, but it's not gone away yet. And then port 1900 UDP, also 19 UDP, both show up on the list here. That is associated with reflection attack activity, denial of service reflection attack activity. I'd hope to actually provide sort of a composite graph of how that's trending. Probably do that next week. I wasn't able to do it in preparation for the program today. And then port 3389 TCP, that's remote desktop protocol, and then finally port 80 TCP, which obviously looking for those dark websites out there. Next item here is the top 10 most sources doing the probing, and look how big port 23 is here. We're going to take, again, a look at the trend associated with that, followed by port 445, we talked about that one, 6881 UDP, followed by 27015 UDP. And then again, we have a couple of ports associated with the, or at least one port that's associated with the reflection attack activity that showed up on the radar, port 1900 UDP. That's 1900 UDP is a simple service discovery protocol, which is, I think, at least in one account, a poorly conceived protocol that's intended to support universal plug and play. Unfortunately, on some devices, all too many devices exposed to the internet as well as internally. So, and invariably one of the problems that we've been seeing here. So next thing I wanted to share with you here is the scan sources. This is the number of source addresses that are detected doing scanning activity on port 23 TCP, looking back the last year and a half, 18 months of activity shown here. And you can see that clearly that the trend is not in a good direction. So when you see a source that's scanning, it's basically an indication they're probably compromised and a part of a botnet. And we're measuring not just in hundreds or thousands, we're measuring in hundreds of thousands here. This is a first, in fact, from my point of view. That is generally what we've seen in the past. We've seen botnets that are on the order of 30,000, 40,000, not in the order of 150,000. So this is, we're breaking new records in terms of the number of sources. And it's, I think, directly accountable to this Internet of Things becoming more prevalent and used in denial of service activity. We've identified and are tracking a number of botnets, not just one, but several, Lizard Squad being one of those. And I think there have been some activities to try to block that. But there are certainly others that are doing denial of service attack activity. And oftentimes it's kind of, they're really attacking just other gamers or gaming service providers. And on occasion, relatively large attacks. And I'm not even sure that in some cases these attackers really even know how big the attacks are that they are generating. We've seen some situations where it looks like they're doing a test attack against themselves, and presumably to see how big the attack was. But I think what is happening is they're they're not seeing the entire attack. There's a bottleneck farther up. They have a machine that has like 1 gigabit interface or something, and they might only see 100 megabits per second of traffic because of a bottleneck farther up in the network they don't know about, and they think, man, I've got to get more resources, and so they crank it up and are consequently creating other kinds of problems on the network in the course of their activities. So. In any case, this is something, I think the notion of safety of devices is going to be something we're going to need to pay closer attention to.
When you see a graph like that, that's one of the things Waylon mentioned in his Internet of Things post, is that most of the scanning that was hitting his little honeypot was coming from other compromised devices. And so several of these are set up not just to infect, but like classical worms, where they go looking for other things. And so he said, you better not think that you can take a new device, hook it to the internet, and then configure it. He said, configure it offline, because you don't have a very small window before it's going to get infected.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Yeah. So, you know, I'd shared with you a little bit earlier, and I think, you know, I'd written a blog post a couple of years ago about some things that really need to be done with these devices to make them more palatable for the internet. You know, obviously, one of the big problems that's been happening is they're being put on the internet and they have services being offered, things like character generator, which has no basic function other than, you know, currently to facilitate denial of service attacks. Those shouldn't be exposed to the internet. The devices need to be locked down a little bit better right off, and this isn't even something that end users have the opportunity to fix. They need to be locked down better right off the shelf. They need some means to be able to control your password better. That is, to just simply put it on the network and perhaps it not even have a documented default password is a problem. You know, sometimes it is documented and the user is supposed to know about it. It should either force a password change, or the default password should be something that is not something you can ascertain from the network. It's maybe printed on the device or something along those lines. You know, other options around this, patching is an important aspect of it. That is, a lot of devices don't have any patching. We mentioned earlier the port, the 32764 scanning activity. There's a patch that's out there, but most likely most of those devices have never been patched to fix that problem. So.
I was just going to say, I think that the technologists, in the past there was I think a broader gap between the technologists and regular folks who aren't technologists, and that gap still exists. Yep. It's narrowing in some respects. The kids are growing up with a little bit more technical knowledge, but still you've got to understand that a housewife or a husband, an accountant, they may not know how to even patch their router. Right. Well, much less any of the Internet of Things devices that are out there.
Absolutely true.
Oh, do we do true confessions on this show?
You can confess whatever you like.
for any bad guys that may be watching. So my Blu-ray DVD player is a Linux device, right? And I'm a security guy, and so when I sit down with my family to watch a movie, and the Blu-ray player pops up a little interface saying, hey, there's an update available for your player, of course, I ignore it and watch the movie with my family, and I don't remember to go back and update the player. I mean, it's like even people that know better don't really know better or don't do better.
Just a comparative a comparison and contrast. Xbox won't let you go any further. So, you know, Microsoft, I think, has learned that lesson, and I think a lot of the other manufacturers, they're just embarking on dealing with software updates. I am actually encouraged to find that they offer an update.
Yes.
Yeah. Because a lot of these devices, you know, I think a big part of it, to your point, James, people do not conceive of these things as computers. They don't conceive of them as running software. It's a device, it's a thing. And I even had, just recently, heard somebody do a presentation, an authoritative person on Internet of Things, claiming that these devices don't have software. And so there's clearly a perception issue that needs to be improved upon. And you know, software patching should be almost automatic, if not automatic, and you know, at least offer it.
It just needs to happen. Yeah. It just needs to happen.
It just needs to happen. So, okay, I'm done ranting.